The applause started before I even sat down. Not for me. For my brother-in-law Devin, who had just finished telling the table about his latest promotion at the firm. Senior partner. 41 years old. Everyone was clapping like he'd landed on the moon, and my mother-in-law kept touching his arm the way she only touched things she was proud of. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and said nothing. It was Thanksgiving. My sister's house in Savannah, the big one on Abercorn Street with the wraparound porch and the magnolia tree that dropped leaves into the gutters every November. The kind of house that made people feel important just by being inside it. Devin had bought it 3 years ago after the market softened, and he still found ways to work that into most conversations. "And what about you, Han?" my mother asked, not looking up from the green bean casserole she was serving herself. Still doing the, "What is it again?" "The nonprofit thing?" "The clinic," I said. "I run the legal clinic at the county courthouse." Right. She nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. My sister Camille gave me a quick look from across the table, the kind that said, "I'm sorry," without saying anything. She'd been giving me that look for about 6 years, ever since I turned down a position at Devin's firm, the one he'd arranged, the favor he'd done, the opportunity he'd handed me that I had apparently thrown away. Devin cut into his turkey and smiled. "Still fighting the good fight," he said. "Somebody's got to do it, right?" There was something in the way he said it, not mean, exactly, just small. Like he was describing someone who collected aluminum cans for a hobby. I smiled back. Yeah, that was the year I decided I was done being the quiet one at Thanksgiving. It took me another 2 years to actually follow through. The thing about Devin is that he's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because this story is easy to flatten into something it wasn't. He coached youth soccer on weekends. He remembered birthdays. He loved my sister in the uncomplicated, devoted way that made her happy and that mattered to me more than almost anything else. But there was this version of me he decided on. Probably sometime around that first Thanksgiving, when I showed up in my beat-up Civic while he pulled into my parents' driveway in the new Audi. And he never revised it. In his mind, I was the idealistic younger sister-in-law who'd made impractical choices, who worked hard for not much money, who meant well but didn't quite understand how the real world operated. And the thing is, families have a way of reflecting back whatever the most confident person in the room believes. Devin was always the most confident person in the room, so over time, without anyone meaning it to happen, his version of me became the one everyone else used too. My mom started prefacing stories about me with, "She's always been the passionate one," which sounds like a compliment until you realize it's the word people use when they mean impractical. My dad, who'd retired from 20 years in the army and didn't say much about anything, just watched from the end of the table with a look I could never quite read. My brother-in-law was not cruel. He was just certain, and certainty in a family that defers to it is its own kind of power. I didn't fight it. That's the part I'm least proud of. Every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every summer cookout on the lawn, I'd sit there and absorb it, and on the drive home, I'd think next time I'll say something. Next time I'll push back. Next time I won't let it slide. I let it slide for 6 years. The reason I never said anything was complicated, and also completely simple, I didn't want to make things hard for Camille. She was happy. Devin made her happy, and I loved her enough to eat a lot of quiet dinners at her table. But the summer I turned 33, something shifted. It was the 4th of July cookout. Camille's backyard, same as always. The long folding tables, the American flags, the smell of charcoal and bug spray. My parents were there. Devin's parents were there. A handful of his colleagues from the firm because Devin always invited people who would make the party feel more important than it was. I'd driven down from Atlanta the night before. I'd been up until 2 in the morning finalizing an appeal brief. A case I'd been working on for 14 months, a wrongful conviction that had taken longer than anyone expected. I was tired in the bone-deep way that doesn't respond to coffee, and I probably should have gone to bed earlier, but I couldn't stop reading. By noon, I was sitting in a lawn chair with a paper plate, listening to Devin explain to one of his partners, a tall man named Garrett who laughed at everything Devin said, how the legal aid sector just doesn't attract the top talent anymore. The best people go where the money is. "That's just reality. My sister-in-law is in legal aid," Devin said, with the tone of someone bringing up a mildly interesting curiosity. Works at the county courthouse. Nonprofit. She's very dedicated. Garrett turned to look at me. I could feel the evaluation happening in real time. The lawn chair, the paper plate, the ponytail. He smiled the way people smile when they're being polite. That's great, he said. Important work. Devin nodded, agreeable. It is. Different world than what we do, obviously. But somebody has to. Somebody has to. He'd said that phrase to me so many times, in so many versions, across so many dinners, that it had started to feel like my official title. I was somebody has to. I put my plate down on the grass. I almost said something. I felt it rise in my chest. The actual words forming. Actually, Devin, let me tell you what I've been doing, but my nephew, Camille's 8-year-old, ran into my legs right at that moment asking for more potato salad, and the moment passed and I went inside to get him potato salad. That night in the car, I thought, next time. There was no next time. There was just the Christmas party in December, where the same thing happened in a different room with different wine. The appeal brief was granted in March. I won't use the client's real name. She'd asked me not to, and I'd promised her I wouldn't. But she'd been in custody for 11 years for a crime she hadn't committed. The conviction was built on testimony that had since been recanted, evidence that had been mishandled, and a defense attorney who'd been disbarred 2 years after the verdict for unrelated misconduct. The case had been rejected twice before I picked it up. It was the kind of file that sits in a drawer because no one believes there's a path through. I found the path. It took 14 months, 2 pro bono co-counselors I'd recruited from a firm in DC, a forensic expert who reviewed the original lab work and found the discrepancy, and more hours than I want to count. When the ruling came through, I was in the parking lot of a Walgreens when my phone rang. I sat in my car for 10 minutes after the call ended, just staring at the dashboard. She was going home. The case got picked up by a journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Then the Associated Press ran a short version. The no longer profile. Not about me. Mostly about her, which was exactly how it should be. My name appeared in it twice. The second time, the reporter described me as the attorney who first identified the lab error that anchored the successful appeal. I didn't send it to anyone in my family. I'm not sure why. Maybe I thought they'd be surprised in the way that stings more than indifference. Maybe I just wasn't ready for the conversation that would follow. 3 weeks later, I drove to Savannah for Camille's birthday dinner. It was a Friday evening, early May. Warm enough for the windows to be open. There were maybe 12 of us around the extended table. Family, a couple of Camille's friends from her teacher days, Devin's mother, and Garrett again, who seemed to have become a permanent fixture at Devin's social events. The food was good. The wine was good. Camille looked happy, which made me happy. The conversation moved the way conversations do at those dinners. Work, kids, property values, a political topic someone brought up and then quickly dropped. Devin told a story about a deposition that had gone sideways, and everyone laughed, and Garrett said something about a judge in Fulton County that made Devin nod. At some point, my sister mentioned that I'd been in the news. Oh, just a small thing, I said before anyone could ask. A case I was working on. Devin looked up. The appeal thing? Yeah. He nodded. There was a small pause. I heard about that. That was a state court ruling, right? He said it like a clarification, like he was making sure everyone understood the scale. Not federal, not a landmark, just a state court thing. It was, I said. Still, good result. He picked up his wine glass. Those wrongful conviction cases are tricky. A lot of them don't go anywhere. This one did, I said. He smiled. And then? And I don't think he even meant it to land the way it did. He turned to Garrett and said, "She's been working on this case for over a year." That's the thing about public interest work. The pace is just completely different. You pick one case and you live in it for years. A pause. Not really scalable, but meaningful. The table moved on. Someone asked Camille about a renovation project. The conversation carried itself in another direction. But my dad, who had been sitting at the far end of the table eating pot roast and not saying much, my dad put down his fork. He didn't say anything yet. He just looked at Devin. And then he looked at me. And something in his face changed. I'd seen that look before. I couldn't place it. The dishes were being cleared when Garrett asked what firm I'd been with before the nonprofit. Pendleton and Cross, I said. Criminal defense. I was there for 3 years. He raised his eyebrows. Harlow Pendleton? Yes. He looked at me differently. She's still the best trial attorney in the Southeast, in my opinion. I had a case that bumped up against one of hers back in 2019. Absolute surgeon. A small laugh. Did you work with her directly? She was my supervising partner, I said. I second-chaired 3 of her trials. There was a silence at that end of the table. Not uncomfortable, more like the sound of something recalibrating. Devon's fork paused over his plate for just a moment. You never mentioned that, he said. You never asked, I said. It came out quieter than I expected. Not sharp, not triumphant. Just true. The table continued. The dishes kept moving. But something had changed in the room. The way air pressure changes before a storm. Something you feel before you can explain it. My dad found me on the porch afterward. The lights of Abercorn Street were on, and the magnolia was doing that thing it does in May, dropping those big waxy blossoms that look almost artificial. He came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one without asking if I wanted it. My dad communicated in those kinds of gestures. He always had. We stood there for a minute. He'd retired as a master sergeant, 22 years in, infantry. He didn't talk about it much. A few times growing up, I'd heard him on the phone with someone he'd served with, and his whole voice changed. Something looser and more honest in it than usual. Like he was a different person when he talked to people who actually knew what he'd done. He sipped his coffee and looked at the street. You second-haired Harlow Pendleton, he said. Yeah, how many times? 3 full trials, plus a mistrial that got retried. He nodded slowly. And the appeal you just won. 14 months. Another pause. He turned to look at me. Why don't you ever say that? He asked. Not accusatory. More like he was genuinely puzzled, the way he got puzzled by things he thought should be simple. I didn't have a clean answer for him. I said something about not wanting to make things competitive, not wanting to seem like I was defending myself at Camille's dinner table, not wanting to make her birthday about me. He listened to all of it with the same patient, skeptical expression he'd worn when I was 17, and trying to explain a questionable decision. That's not it, he said. I didn't argue. He was quiet for a long moment. The sound of people washing dishes came through the screen door. Camille's laugh. Devon saying something. Garrett's too loud response. You've been letting him define you, my dad said. Every time you sit at that table and let that particular conversation happen without correcting it, you're agreeing with it. He took another sip of coffee. I've been doing the same thing, sitting at the end of the table, not saying a word. He shook his head. I thought I was keeping the peace. I think I was just keeping quiet. I looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. I should have said something a long time ago. In 22 years, I don't think my dad had ever apologized to me for anything. Not because he wasn't a good father, he was, but because he was the kind of man who corrected course quietly, who showed up differently rather than explaining himself. He expressed things through action, through presence. He said it like it cost him something. We stood there a little longer. A car went past on Abercorn. Go back inside, he said finally. I want to finish my coffee. I nodded and pushed open the screen door. What happened next, I found out later from Camille. My dad stayed on the porch for a few minutes. Then he came back in, got himself another small cup of coffee from the kitchen. He did this slowly and deliberately, she said, in a way that made her stop what she was doing and watch. And he walked back to the dining room where Devon and Garrett were still at the table, going over something on Garrett's phone. He sat down across from Devon. You know who handled the Meredith Coleman appeal? He said. Devon looked up. I heard about that case. Wrongful conviction, right? The lab evidence. Your sister-in-law, my dad said. 14 months. She identified the error in the original lab analysis. She recruited the co-counsel. She wrote the brief that the court accepted. A pause. She second-chaired 3 trials under Harlow Pendleton before she went into public interest work. Another pause. You've been sitting at this table for 6 years talking about her like she chose this because she didn't have better options. Devon was quiet. Garrett, to his credit, said nothing. My dad picked up his coffee cup. I want you to think about whether the conversation at this table is going to change, because she's not going to keep driving down from Atlanta to have the same dinner twice a year." He looked at Devin steadily, the look he used to reserve for situations in the army that required clarity over comfort. "She's too good for that, and you know it." He drank his coffee. Then he got up and went to find my mother. Camille told me all of this the next morning on the phone. I was on I-16 headed back to Atlanta, somewhere between Macon and the point where the trees open up and the highway flattens out. She cried a little. "I didn't expect that. He's never talked to Devin like that," she said. "Ever." "Is Devin upset?" "No." A pause. "I think he's embarrassed, actually." Another pause. "He should be. I should have said something myself." Her voice was small. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. "You never seemed bothered." "I seemed fine," I said. "That's not the same as not bothered." She was quiet. "I'm not angry at you," I told her. "I want you to know that." "I know," she said, "but I'm angry at me." We talked for another hour, the longest, most honest conversation we'd had in years. She told me things she'd been holding. I told her things I'd let harden into resentment without meaning to. By the time I pulled off the highway, I felt lighter in a way I couldn't entirely explain. That evening, Devin texted me. I almost didn't read it. I sat with the notification for a few minutes, coffee going cold, the city going golden outside my apartment window. "I owe you an apology," it said, "a real one. Can we talk when you're back in Savannah?" I sat with that for a while too. Then I typed back, "Yeah, we can." He called me the following weekend. He didn't open with excuses, which I hadn't expected. He just said that he'd been thinking about the things my father had said, and then about all the things he couldn't unremember. The phrasing, the tone, the steady, gentle dismissal that had accumulated over 6 years into something he hadn't meant, but also hadn't stopped. "I think I needed someone I respected to name it," he said. "That's not an excuse. It's just, I heard it from your dad and it landed differently than it would have from anyone else." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." He meant it. I could tell because he didn't follow it with anything. No softening clause, no redirection, no, but you have to understand, just the apology. "Thank you," I said. There was a long pause. "The Meredith Coleman case," he said. "I read the AJC piece after Dad talked to me. A beat. That was serious work." "It was." "You're really good, aren't you?" he said. Not a question, more like the sound of someone updating a file they'd been operating from for too long. I let the silence sit for a moment. "Yeah," I said. "I am." The next Thanksgiving was different. Not dramatically different. Families don't transform overnight, and I don't believe in that kind of story, but different enough. My dad told a story about a woman in his unit who'd been passed over for promotion twice before a CO from another base reviewed her record and straightened it out. He told it the way he told most stories, slowly, to the table, without looking at anyone in particular. But I noticed Devin listening. Camille had made the green bean casserole, same as always. My nephew asked me if I was famous because his teacher had mentioned my name in class, a local attorney who'd worked on an important case. I told him not famous, just busy. He seemed satisfied with that. After dinner, my dad and I stood on the porch again. Same coffee, same magnolia, same November chill coming in off the street. "Better," he said. "Yeah." He nodded and drank his coffee. I thought about all the dinners before this one, the accumulation of them, the small erasures, the quiet agreements, the way I'd gotten so good at being invisible that I'd half convinced myself I didn't mind. I thought about my client driving home to her family after 11 years, about the moment in the Walgreens parking lot when everything I'd fought for finally became real. I hadn't done that work because I needed anyone at a dinner table to see it. I'd done it because it was the only work worth doing. But there's a difference between humility and disappearing. There's a difference between keeping the peace and agreeing to be small. My dad had taught me a lot of things growing up, mostly without talking. How to be steady, how to show up, how to keep going when the case looked impossible. He'd also taught me, finally 22 years too late and exactly on time, that you can love your family and still tell the truth in a room they thought they controlled. I finished my coffee. Inside, someone was laughing. Camille's laugh. The real one. I pushed open the screen door and went back in. Used to think staying quiet was the same as being gracious. That letting things slide at the dinner table was a form of love, a way to protect my sister's happiness, to keep the peace, to not be the person who made Thanksgiving uncomfortable. I told myself that every time I drove home from Savannah with something unspoken sitting in my chest like a stone. What I didn't understand then, and what took me an embarrassingly long time to see, is that silence has consequences too. Not just for the person who stays quiet, but for everyone around them. Every time I let Devin's version of me go unchallenged, I was confirming it. I was handing it credibility. And the people at that table, people who loved me, started using that version too. Not because they believed it more than they believed in me, but because I'd never given them anything to replace it with. That's the part I had to sit with. Not what Devin did, but what I allowed, year after year, because I convinced myself that endurance was the same as integrity. It isn't. What actually got me through 14 months on a case that had been rejected twice before I touched it wasn't patience or optimism. It was something quieter and harder, the refusal to let what was true get buried by what was convenient. My client had been in custody for 11 years because someone in a position of authority had decided, somewhere along the line, that the inconvenience of revisiting the case outweighed the obligation to get it right. I understood that system. I'd been living a smaller version of it at my sister's dinner table. You can't fight that in a courtroom while you're agreeing to it at home. Eventually, the contradiction catches up with you. My dad figured it out before I did. He'd spent 22 years in the Army making decisions under conditions where clarity mattered more than comfort, and he recognized what was happening at that table for exactly what it was. He also recognized his own role in it, the quiet at the end of the table that he'd mistaken for keeping the peace, and he didn't look away from that. That took something, more than most people give him credit for. The night he sat down across from Devin and said what he said, he wasn't being confrontational. He was just being honest in a room that had gone too long without it. And honesty, delivered steadily and without cruelty, has a way of rearranging things that no argument ever could. What I carry from all of this isn't a lesson about standing up for yourself. That framing is too simple. It's more about what you owe the truth. You owe it accuracy. You owe it the space to be said out loud. And if you're someone who knows how to find it, build it, fight for it in a courtroom over 14 months, you owe it at least as much at a dinner table. Devin apologized. He meant it. That matters. But the part that changed me wasn't his apology. It was the moment I heard my own voice say, "Yeah, I am," and didn't hedge it, didn't soften it, didn't add anything after it. Some things take longer to learn than they should. This one took me 6 years and one phone call from a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, when everything I'd fought for finally became real. I don't think I'd changed the timeline. I'm not sure I could have been ready any earlier. But I know what I'll do now when someone sits across from me and hands me a smaller version of myself to wear. I'll put it down.